We're back to Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro, where this podcast explores all the new ideas to make the mining industry smarter and more sustainable. So I'm your host, Gregory Zhang, Senior Consultant with Snowden Optiro. So today we're going to talk about more under the topic of grade control and reconciliation. So a topic that seems a bit of technical, but actually it's very important. So to guide us through, I'm joined by Ian Glacken, Executive Consultant with Snowden Optiro, and he's expert on this topic. So Ian, welcome.
Thank you, Greg.
And do you want to talk about your reconciliation?
Sure, reconciliation. Let me give you a bit of an overview. So reconciliation, why do I find it interesting? Well, it's fascinating because it's so complicated. It brings into a lot of issues, right from the resource model through to the sampling of the concentrate at the plant. There's lots of tricky issues. And it's for that reason it's very interesting, and of course the main reason is that it provides it's a fundamental activity for the mining process. Every minerals mine needs to undergo some sort of reconciliation, so it's absolutely fundamental to the process. And to be honest, it's not always done very well. So that's why I find reconciliation interesting, Greg.
Cool. So we've all heard about the horror stories of mines missing their production targets because models didn't really match with the reality. So what role does the grade control model play in the mine value chain and reconciliation?
Yeah, so in a previous podcast we talked about the grade control and the grade control model, and this is distinct from the resource model and the reserve model. Now, the resource and the reserve model are important because that is what the company reports to the market. So if you're valuing a company, if you're deciding whether you're going to buy shares in that company or not, you're interested in the resource model and the reserve model. So that's important. That's part of the mine value chain, at the start of the mine value chain. We're here to talk about grade control. Grade control is vital as part of the mine value chain because, as we discussed in the previous podcast, it's the last lot of information that we gather before we start blasting the rock and before we start mining it. In other words, I always say it provides the best possible preview of what it actually is we're going to mine. And this speaks to the medium-term forecasts and the short-term forecasts and the daily forecasts. So it actually gives us a preview of what the mine is actually going to be producing, which as a shareholder, as an analyst, you don't actually see. But from a day-to-day point of view, as a mine geologist, it's critical. So it's the mine geologist tool. It's predicting what we're going to mine, and hopefully what we're doing in grade control, we're maximizing the value of the ore body. So it's a very fundamental part of the mine value chain, and it's a very important part of the whole reconciliation process.
Awesome. So it sounds like reconciliation isn't just a geologist's problem, but it involves also mining engineers, plant metallurgists, or even financial teams.
Yeah, that's right. We talk about the mine value chain, and at the start of that chain, as I just mentioned to you, we have the resource model, which involves geologists, resource geologists, exploration geologists. Then, very importantly, we have the reserve model. The reserve model is as I said to you, what we're actually going to the budget, the long-term forecast, and that obviously is the domain of the mining engineer, the planning engineer. So they would take the resource model from the geologist. They would think about the modifying factors. The modifying factors typically would be ore loss and dilution, but others as well. So we're bringing the mining engineer into the process. So the mining engineer is responsible for the reserve. The reserve is responsible for the budget. The budget is responsible for the cash flow. The cash flow is responsible for the valuation of the company and broadly speaking for their share price. So from that point of view, we've got the geologists, we've got the mining engineers. Then as we go further down the value chain, we have the grade control model, which we've been talking about, and that is the domain of the geologist, the mine geologist, but also we would involve the metallurgist, because the metallurgists quite often are dictating what they need to get. If it's a multi-metal mine or a mine where the value needs to be maximized, the metallurgist will have a say in that. And the geologists need to, and together with the production people, they need to match the blend, if you like, or the recipe that the plant is wanting. So we're getting the metallurgists involved. Then we're mining the ore body, which of course, again, is the production team. That's part of the reconciliation process. Finally, it goes to the processing plant. And once we go to the processing plant, then we're in the domain of the metallurgists. The metallurgists control the plant. Their objective is to maximize the recovery and to meet the targets. The geologist that's in charge of the reconciliation, and it typically is a geologist, the mine value chain, they need to liaise with the metallurgist to make sure that the metallurgical balance calculation generated by the metallurgists is accurately depicting the metal and indeed the tailings and the metal in the circuit that's coming out of the mine or staying in the mine. So as you say, we're involving geologists, mining engineers, production people, metallurgists, and quite often, as you say, the financial people would get involved in the targeting and so on. So it's very much a team effort.
Awesome. So let's bring the topic back a little bit more, focus on the grade control modeling itself. So what kind of the common techniques we use to estimate this grade control model?
Well, typically with grade control, the thing about grade control is we've got a lot of data. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a grade control model, is to have a lot of data. Now, do we have enough data? That's another topic for discussion. But in general, we would need to assume that we've got as much data as we need and no more. Now, that means that in general, when we get to grade control, our estimation process is quite simple. You and I have worked on a project recently where the grade control estimation is not that simple, but in most mines, in 95% of the mines, the actual grade control modeling process, because we have a lot of data, it's quite straightforward. Now, from an estimation point of view, that means that in most cases, not all cases, in most cases, we can use something like ordinary kriging being the theoretically optimal method for estimating at a grade control stage. So because of the level of data, in general, not always, but in general, we can tackle it with quite straightforward modeling.
Yes, and for the commodities that has very low variability, arguably speaking, you could even use an inverse distance, because all the samples are equally spacing, more or less, and then that just makes the estimation part easier.
That's right. I mean, we can talk about the pros and cons of inverse distance modeling, but you're right. Absolutely. If we have a lot of data, if we have low variability in the ore body, then inverse distance should do just as good a job as ordinary kriging for those that don't like ordinary kriging.
Yep. But on the other opposite is that we also made occasionally we give the advice that probably people should consider multiple indicator kriging for the grade control trading. Grade control modeling stage, and I happen to know that Mohan Srivastav, who's a geostatistician, and he gives similar advice on the MRE conference 2025. So that was a very interesting point. So Ian, do you want to comment on?
Yes. So as we discussed, in most cases, simple estimation is fine, but in other cases, more probabilistic estimation is required. And if we have a tricky ore body, once we're dealing with probabilities, it gives us a little bit more flexibility. The problem with that is two problems really. One is it's more difficult. And the second one is that the time that's taken to generate these probabilistic models is longer. So if we're in a pressure situation, which we are with grade control, we might not always have the luxury to be able to do those. But I would agree. I mean, and if you have the chance to do this probabilistic modeling, in other words, multiple indicator kriging or categorical kriging, then it's probably going to help your grade control modeling.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Thanks again for sharing your expertise, and thanks for listening to Fresh Thinking. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with your colleagues. And if you have questions or topics you would like us to explore, please drop us a line. And until next time.